Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight, and welcome to the fifth and final program in the So You Think You Know Civics series. My name is Greer Luce. I'm the Curator of Education and Public Programs here at Morven. Through this series, we've explored broad questions about the past and present of the U.S. government, learning from historians, journalists, scholars, and political scientists. Topics have included what is democracy, what is citizenship, what is political participation, and what is law. We'll conclude the series tonight by tackling the question, what is political leadership, with an excellent speaker to address this topic. I should add we have recorded most of these programs, and we'll send out an email after our program tonight with the recordings. So if you didn't have a chance to see them, feel free to check out the recordings. Our world has, of course, shifted and changed quite a bit since we opened this series in April of 2024. We knew in planning So You Think You Know Civics that the final program would land the week after the 2024 general election. We want to thank you all for taking the time and energy to be here tonight after a tiring and stressful election season when the topic of civics has been top of mind for so many. I also want to thank the Princeton Public Library for being such an amazing partner throughout this series. We have Kim Dorman here tonight. Thanks, Kim. The library provides some incredible resources and programming for our communities on democracy and voting, and so much else, as I'm sure many of you here are aware. We look forward to future collaborations. Thank you likewise to the New Jersey Council for the Humanities, the sponsor for this series. The council supports a wide range of humanities programming around the state, and I really encourage everyone to explore their website and other co-sponsored events, especially if you're interested in the topics of civics, history, and community. Tonight, we'll explore political leadership, drawing lessons from history and reflections on the present. One of the goals of this series is to learn, through a range of speakers and topics, how we can make change in our democracy. Now more than ever, I think this is a powerful goal, and especially one that we can endeavor to tackle together, learning and growing from those who have come before us. It's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Saladin Ambar. Flip over my sheet here. Dr. Ambar is a senior scholar at Eagleton Center on the American Governor and professor of political science at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. He is the author of 6 books, including Stars and Shadows, The Politics of Interracial Friendship from Jefferson to Obama, which won the PROSE Award for Best Book in Government and Politics from the Association of American Publishers in 2022, and the book Oxford Union, Racial Politics in a Global Era, currently in development for a feature-length film by Number 9 Films in the UK. Dr. Ambar's forthcoming book, 3 Murders on the Mississippi, 1,000 Days That Made Abraham Lincoln, offers a narrative examination of a series of racially motivated lynchings and murders beginning in 1835 that hunted the young Abraham Lincoln and illuminated for him how vulnerable America was to the rise of despotism. Dr. Ambar is currently the New Jersey Social Justice Institute's Director of the Democracy Committee for the New Jersey Reparations Council, and also serves as scholarly advisor to the Lincoln Presidential Foundation and the Woodrow Wilson Presidential Library and Museum. Before his career in academia, Dr. Ambar taught in the New York City and New Jersey public school system for 18 years, beginning as a Teach for America recruit. It's now my pleasure to welcome Dr. Ambar.
Good to see you all out here this evening. Greer is correct. I spent 10 of those 18 years here in Princeton at the high school. Half of my colleagues are here today in the first couple of rows, it looks like. So there's that. I'm really, really excited to see you all. I do want to begin by thanking Greer and the wonderful folks here at Morven for extending an invitation to me. This is a place that's committed to civic engagement. There's a real zeal for history. And I just want to thank you for your work and effort towards building an educated community. Very proud to see so many friends and students here for extra credit and indulgence to participate. It's always a good thing. So, where to begin? What is political leadership? Morven, your timing is impeccable. What can be a more lighthearted subject than political leadership just a week after this election? If you listen carefully enough, you can hear the national shredding of speeches, personal statements for undergraduate applications, podcast topics, et cetera, being shredded left and right. Many of which, including my talk, would have been germane back in August when I was invited. All of that is out the window now. As Greer mentioned, I am currently working on a book on Abraham Lincoln, mob violence and the threats to American democracy in the 1830s. And in a rare moment of wisdom for me, I thought maybe I should wait until after the election before I write the preface. And now that preface is going to be longer than the book. Let me give you a sense of where I intend to go tonight on this question of what is political leadership. I want to consider democratic versus autocratic leadership. Then I want to highlight the nature of leadership in an age of democratic peril and decline. And then I want to get to the heart of things and share some thoughts on leadership and loneliness, leadership and loss, and finally, leadership and love. First, democratic as opposed to autocratic leadership. I think it's important to remember, particularly in this political moment, that successful leadership, and by that I mean the ability to persuade people to move, to act, to feel differently than they otherwise would, is premised upon three critical talents. These are vision, belief, and clarity. One way to consider these variables or talents of effective leadership is to simply ask a question of anyone aspiring to lead other human beings: where are you taking us? What do you believe? And what will be different? I think if we're being honest, the Harris campaign failed to effectively answer any of those three questions well. And while the Trump campaign had answers that were shocking to the conscience on all three, they nevertheless were well known and deeply ingrained in the minds of their supporters. Democratic leadership must have an affirmative, specific answer to what George H.W. Bush, y'all remember him? I like being in a crowd with my students. Nobody knows anybody before 2014, but I can say George H.W. Bush to this crowd, and y'all like, oh yeah, I remember that really well. George H.W. Bush, he called it the vision thing. Remember the vision thing? Well, let me just say, we're not going back is a valuable educative phrase. It's a good stump speech phrase, but it needs to be followed by a comma. Something along the lines of, we're not going back and here is where we're going. I'm reminded of the most important comma in American history. It's actually a semicolon, but you'll forgive me. You'll recognize it. It's from Lincoln's second inaugural address. With malice toward none, comma, with charity for all. That's a powerful comma. That comma is doing hundreds of years of work. Malice toward none is critical. It's John Locke and a letter on toleration. It says, I don't hate you. We need that, Lord knows. Tolerance is a good thing. We may be screaming for tolerance as an ideal in a few months. It is vital to democratic politics, and I don't want to undersell it. But it is, at the end of the day, only a beginning. Imagine if Lincoln had ended the second inaugural statement from that last paragraph with malice toward none, period. In a republic, in a society premised on the belief that other human beings and their needs matter, we need caritas, the Latin root word for charity, which is love. A democratic republic requires love. Lincoln understood you can't build a nation of equals with tolerance alone. That can work in autocratic regimes, but in a system where your vote, your grimy coming home on the number 7 train alone at night vote, counts just as much as the next person's, well, that's going to require love. Have you ever been on the subway or the Rutgers buses and looked across from you and wondered, how is this person going to vote? That requires a belief in human equality that autocracy doesn't require. So the Harris campaign, to my point, needed a comma, Lord, a semicolon, an M dash, something to go beyond we're not going back. A vision is a project, a set of tangible objectives. It is imaginative. And at the end of the day, it must inspire. It's a man on the moon by the end of the decade kind of stuff. It's women will one day get the right to vote kind of stuff. It's get out of your seat to pursue something bigger than yourself kind of stuff. Autocratic regimes don't necessarily have to inspire, they require. And anything that feels like a requirement is too heavy a burden to carry in a democratic republic. We shall overcome isn't a requirement, it is a call. Ask not, my fellow Americans, what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. That's not a requirement, that's a call. That's vision. If you're Moses, you offer milk and honey. Milk is pretty good in the desert. You're in the desert, you're high, milk's good. No, milk and honey. Leaders need to work on vision first and foremost. Next is belief. Before a leader engages in the project of helping people get somewhere, they must have to know what they believe and that they have to feel that belief. On the subject of reproductive rights, if you go back to me towards that Harris debate with President Trump, Harris was clearly someone who believed in women's reproductive freedom, yes, but she felt it. Her answers had a passion there. For whatever reason, many men who should have felt it didn't, and a clear majority of, frankly, white women were unmoved by it. I hate to put it crassly, but the results of the election seem to demonstrate, at least in a number of states, that if I could vote for my own reproductive freedom in my home state and still get my dose of authoritarianism, I'm happy to do it. That's a changed audience. You know how in Julius Caesar, Shakespeare, he has the plebs, they go back and forth in the beginning where they were for Pompey and then they go for Caesar. For Pompey, they go for Caesar, right? And then after Brutus's speech, someone from the crowd cries out, let him be Caesar. That's a changed audience. You're dealing with a Republican decline, and so the vision, the belief has to shift to encompass something bigger than what the demos, the crowd, the audience can achieve on its own. Let him be Caesar. So let me begin by saying the effort to do all of this may not be successful. We'll get to that when we talk about leadership and losing. When you get to your young people, when you get to your middle ages, you start thinking about loss. Okay, that's coming. Just don't worry about it now, but it's coming, all right? Leadership and loss and losing. The point here is democratic politics calls for wide and all-encompassing belief. Vision, yes, but something the leader can clearly feel. We're back to feeling, and Harris at the debate and what she felt about reproductive rights. Feel and believe in. You know, there's a wonderful chapter in Robert Caro's, one of his great books on Lyndon Johnson. And the book is The Passage of Power. That was his 4th book. And the chapter is called The Working Up. It's about how Johnson would pace the office, talking about how he himself believed in civil rights. He was a boxer, psyching himself up before a big match, talking himself into believing with deep conviction that the time was now for civil rights. You would have thought Johnson was a black man from reading Robert Caro's accounts in The Working Up. A leader has to feel first before they can convey. Belief, conviction, passion, these are powerful weapons for democratic leadership, in part because fascistic leadership almost always has it. We could talk about Max Weber and charisma and what charismatic leadership is, but democratic leadership needs passion. Granted, we have to be mindful about how we come to our beliefs. That's always important. But this does not excuse us for how we sell them and the passion we have while we sell them. You know, when Dr. King spoke to that Memphis crowd on April 3rd, 1968, no one doubted when he said that he had seen the promised land. I want you to think about that, because there are a lot of, in the 1960s, hyperbolic Negro preachers. For King to say, I've seen the promised land, and for the audience, the crowd, the demos, to believe it and feel it with him, that's a special kind of leadership. There's a difference between ordinary belief and the kind of righteous belief that moves mountains. Okay. So before moving on to leadership and loneliness, loss and love, let me say a few words about clarity. And by clarity, I mean separation. I'm talking about distinguishing yourself from the alternative. Democratic leadership, especially during an election, is about the presentation of binary choices. You start throwing Dick Cheney and language about the most lethal military fighting force in the world into my pot, and I'm not sure I'm a Democrat anymore. I'm unclear about what I'm signing up for. I thought, this is me, I thought we were an anti-war, anti-military, industrial establishment complex party. I thought that's what we were. I thought, where do I fit into this? What are you asking me to do? I understand the read on the electorate. I think it was a bad read. It's a deflating, demoralizing read. You cannot force Liz Cheney on me and then shut down any decent pro-Harris Michigan Palestinian from appearing on stage to make even the most tepid statement about support for the party. I'm going to guess the 18 to 29-year-old crowd isn't in the throes of passion for Liz Cheney. And I'm not knocking Liz Cheney. God bless her moral stance against outright fascism. But she does not represent the kind of clarifying message needed when democracy is on the line. Ovid said, love and fortune favor the bold, not love and fortune favor centrist triangulation. If the Democratic Party is not careful, in these post-industrial, shape-shifting times, it will centrist itself out of existence. I'm old enough to remember Mario Cuomo. Y'all remember Mario Cuomo? That was my dude. I love Mario Cuomo. Okay, so whatever biases you're hearing from a kids who grew up with a black father or Italian-American mother, in the projects, in Queens, who love Mario Cuomo. Sue me, all right? That speech he gave at the Democratic National Convention is now 40 years old. It was titled The Tale of Two Cities, the binary. It was a clarifying message about the differences between the two parties. Granted, it was a losing message in its time, but not for all times. I'm not so sure that even in wilderness years, you give up on milk and honey. You fight for it, you long for it, you cherish it as an ideal, even in the face of defeat. To reiterate, leadership articulates a vision, it articulates belief, and it offers clarity. The past 25 years, I'm not even gonna go back to Watergate, Vietnam, I'm not gonna go back to Iran-Contra, the last 25 years have offered brutal lessons about small d democratic decline. In our country alone, we have watched a Supreme Court shut down the counting of ballots during a presidential election. We've witnessed a failure to respond to warnings of a terrorist attack and the subsequent misadventure of invading another country and killing over 1 million of its citizens while wrecking our global reputation over claims of weapons of mass destruction. Do y'all remember this? We've seen a great American city left to drown for weeks. We've seen corporate and bank bailouts while the general public was left hanging out to dry. We've seen a pandemic willfully ignored by an American president. And then a violent assault on the nation's capital, cops being speared, and the vice president threatened to be hanged. We've seen our Treasury Secretary tell us not long ago that we've got an infinite amount of dollars to support 2 wars abroad, while people at home can barely buy groceries, let alone pay their rent. Is it any wonder that democracy is imperiled? Is it any wonder that the false face of salvation somehow looks so attractive? The audience changed. The audience has changed. The crowd is no longer the crowd we thought it was. Let him be Caesar. What is there to be done? Let's talk about leadership and loneliness first. Leadership, real leadership, is lonely. I'm thinking about a young Abraham Lincoln. It's 1837. He's 28 years old in the Illinois legislature, and the legislature has just passed a statement opposing abolitionism. White Illinoisans were sick of those crazy white abolitionists moving into their state and making all kinds of havoc there and around the country. So they drafted a statement decrying abolitionism. Now here's Lincoln. And we're told, this is an aside, he's moderate, he's so conservative, he really didn't do all that. He was forced into glory. That's the name of a book about Lincoln, Forced into Glory. Such a moderate. Well, let's see what Lincoln does. He's in a conservative northern state with real antagonisms towards African Americans. By the 1840s, Illinois will pass a ban on the in-migration of blacks into the state. That's quite something. That's a different migrant crisis that white Illinoisans are worried about in the 1830s and 40s. But here's Lincoln. He realizes there are five legislators total that opposed the ban or the statement against abolitionism. So he runs around to get his white colleagues to sign on to a statement condemning slavery alongside it. And he runs around, hey, I know you're one of the guys. Gets the brush off, total brush off. Finally, he finds one guy named Dan Stone, a colleague who has decided, coincidentally, not to seek re-election. A lot of people get bold when they're not up for re-election. You notice that, right? He found Dan Stone. Dan Stone's not running for office again, and he convinces Stone to sign on to a statement condemning slavery. It's a pretty tepid statement in that it also criticizes abolitionists, but Lincoln will take it. Out of all the members of the Illinois House, Lincoln is the only person facing re-election willing to condemn slavery on the record. That's lonely leadership. That's not good politics. As much as we say Lincoln, he's moderate, he's strategic, that's pretty awful politics in Illinois, to be the only white guy out there with an anti-slavery statement that has to face the electorate again. But it is impossible to be a great leader without sitting alone. Now, I'm interjecting this for my young students who have no cultural IQ whatsoever, so I'm going to quote from The Godfather. It's terrible what has happened to this country with young people. For those of you that remember in The Godfather 2, when they flash back to the dinner table where Michael tells the family he has joined the army, right? Pearl Harbor has happened, and they're sitting around the table. He says, yeah. And Sonny, the brother, says, what idiot would sign up for the war? And Michael says, I did. And, almost knocks his head off, right? The scene ends with the Godfather's arrival, the real actual Don, for a surprise birthday party. And they're bickering because Sonny cannot believe, and no one really can believe, Tom cannot believe, none of the family can believe that Michael would decide to fight for his country, but not his blood. That's how they put it. Fredo is the only one that understands, but that's a different lecture. Well, we can have a lecture on Fredo and democracy next year, not to invite myself. So Michael's sitting alone. They all get up and go to say surprise to the Don who's come into the house. And Michael's sitting at the table, smoking a cigarette by himself. And you hear surprise in the background. And Coppola's camera freezes on Michael. There he is, sitting alone at the dining room table, filled with the kind of comfort with loneliness that is required of leadership. It's a symbol of him being the only one capable of being the next Godfather. All right. I appreciate the cultural allusions allowed. A few years ago, when I was writing a book on the politics of interracial friendship, I wrote about the friendship between Dr. King and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. Now, those two men had a special bond, and Heschel was one of the few people who remained close to King after he spoke out against the Vietnam War at Riverside Church on April 4th, 1967. You go back, you can see Heschel introducing King. He stood with him. No NAACP, no Urban League, none of these black organizations, no black church. So I had the pleasure of interviewing King's speechwriter, Clarence Jones, while I was writing this book. Clarence Jones is still with us. He was the author of the I Have a Dream speech. King trusted him, admired him. He asked, Jones, will you write a speech about Vietnam for me? And I'm learning this through the interview. Jones told me that he wrote the most milquetoast speech imaginable about Vietnam. It was a lot of, some people say the Vietnam War is okay, some people say it's bad, some people say we're doing too much, some people are saying we're not doing, it was one of those speeches, right? Right down the middle, say nothing about it. King got furious with Jones. He said, Clarence, you know I am a Christian minister. I have got to say something one way or the other about Vietnam. What is this you're giving me? Jones clapped back, as the kids say. He clapped back at Dr. King and said, I'm trying to save your ass. I, Clarence Jones, am a nobody. I can come out against the war. You cannot. King did not hesitate, however. In the end, he hired another speechwriter, and that was that. I asked Jones the obvious question, at least it was obvious to me. I asked him, do you think that Riverside speech had anything to do with Dr. King's assassination 1 year later to the day? Without pausing a beat, he raised his voice and said 3 times, without question, without question, without question. Leadership is lonely. But the highest forms of leadership involve sacrifice. It involves sitting off to the table by yourself. If you're lucky, maybe you'll have some crazy old Jewish rabbi with you, but that's about it. If you're lucky, you got Heschel off there saying, I'm with you, son. This brings us to leadership and loss. My favorite story of leadership and loss is the story of when Mario Cuomo lost the 1977 mayoral race to Ed Koch in New York City. I was a kid then, and I remember the headlines. Little more, but I remember the headlines. But when I went back to research Cuomo, I came across a statement he made after they had called the race for Koch. All the reporters were around trying to get an interview with Cuomo. And you know how they do, stick their mic in your face. Well, how does it feel? You must feel terrible. Life is over for you. What are you going to do next? It was one of those kinds of press conferences. And Cuomo, he said the following. He said, I am where most people thought I ought to have been in the beginning, and that is with the people I was born and raised up with, the people I helped protect against the blunders of the politicians, with the little people. You know, there's no shame in returning to the people you were born and raised up with. Nobody wants to leave power. Have you noticed? Look around you. People leave kicking and screaming. That in and of itself is a sign of democracy in peril. But Cuomo lost with dignity, and that was true of his defeat after his 3rd term in 1994. Democracy is dependent upon dignified defeat. Leadership is dependent upon dignified defeat. And there is no clearer sign of the rise of fascism in a society than the erosion of that proud principle. Remember, the end of Julius Caesar, things have gone to hell. Cassius has made some awful decisions. Thou hast misconstrued everything. Cassius doesn't know what the hell's going on. So he's gotten Brutus into a hell of a jam. And Brutus, you know, he's a proud Roman. But shit, I'm going to kill myself. This is over, right? Okay, so he calls Strato over to kill him. But before Brutus makes his exit from life's stage, Shakespeare, ever the subtle civic Republican, has him deliver these lines. I shall have glory by this losing day, more than Octavius and Antony, by this vile conquest shall attain unto. I shall have glory by this losing day, more than Octavius and Antony, by this vile conquest shall attain unto. Leadership in loss is a powerful thing. I know it's sacrilege in a country where being labeled a loser is akin to having the mark of Cain on your forehead. But if the Black freedom struggle means anything to small d democratic politics, then it means generations can bask in glory, despite vile conquests being achieved at their expense. Why? What are we going to say to the ghosts of W.B. Du Bois, of Ida B. Wells, and all the rest who labored without victory, never tasting freedom as we know it? In a society in moral collapse, being on the losing side may well be an indicator of your humanity. If I may quote from my Italian brother, Antonio Gramsci, I don't get to quote from Gramsci much teaching American politics, the great anti-fascist thinker who was imprisoned by Benito Mussolini, Gramsci wrote the following: "The old world is dying, and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters." Let's end with leadership and love. Leading with love is valuable in and of itself because it puts you in opposition to those monsters. That is first and foremost. It restores your soul. As the writer Charles Bukowski said, if you're worried about losing your soul, that's a good thing because it still means you have a soul left to lose. Leading with love sparks the political imagination. I remember being about 17 years ago, having lunch at Catherine Lombardi's in New Brunswick. Y'all know Catherine Lombardi's? A couple of people, oh, that heavy, we're talking the real Italian with the heavy sauce. Don't give me that northern, I don't want any northern Italian. I want the heavy stuff, all right? So I'm having lunch. I promise this is not a story about my appetite, but that we're having lunch, me and a top New Jersey Democratic Party operative. He had worked on the Clinton campaign in New Jersey years before, and between bites of my manigot, he looked me in the eye, and what does he say to me? "White people will never vote for a black man for president, not in Ohio. White people in Ohio will never vote for a black man for president." That's what he told me. And I'm thinking to myself, I want to believe in white people. Some of my best friends. I mean, what are you telling me? My mom, they'll never vote for him. Not in Ohio. That's around the time that Barack Obama had declared his candidacy for the presidency. You know, when I attended Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service, there were other similar truths that they were teaching us. The Cold War was a long twilight struggle. That was from John Kennedy's inaugural address. The Berlin Wall would never come down. We were taught that. We were told the troubles in Northern Ireland would never come to an end. We were told that we would never see Nelson Mandela alive. Never. We didn't even know what he looked like. We had those old photos of him. You know, the Black Power days in the 80s, the Public Enemy and the hip hop music. We had those posters on our wall. There'd be Nelson Mandela looking like he was 30 or whatever he was when he got arrested. You'll never see him alive, they told us. They told us the best we could hope for with South Africa was something they called constructive engagement. What are you going to do? It's going to last forever. We got to work with these people. They told us all the impossible things. And a black person becoming president was just part of the mix of shit that could never happen. Of course, we know now that there are forces greater than knowing. There is a power greater than that offered by political insight. There are fires, Lord, there are still fires, I believe, lit by the human spirit that can never be extinguished. And it is the job of leaders to remind us of that. And sometimes the leadership may not even be the leaders. It may be the mass of the people, a people who have a love and a longing for freedom that shatters the impossible, that makes a way out of no way. You know, many years ago, a young man in the prime of his life was in a bad situation. He was dying on a kitchen floor. He had been shot in the head, but somehow still miraculously retained some degree of consciousness. As his head was lifted up and he looked around the room, Bobby Kennedy said, "Is everybody else all right?" No, Bobby, we are not all right, not by a mile. But so long as we are asking that question about others, so long as we make that the focus of our political leadership, we can be. Maybe, just maybe, we can be. Thank you. I don't know whether I can take questions. I don't know whether we got snacks. I don't know what's going. What are we doing? You want to take questions? All right. Whatever you. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Can you speak a bit about leadership or effective political leadership in a climate of identity politics and all of this identity categorization and the media approach to people?
It's interesting. I don't know, I'm thinking about the language of, it's certainly not helpful political language of defund the police. But what I'm concerned about, in part, in large measure, is not so much the opposition to the slogan of defund the police, but the failure of people who feel that way to respond to George Floyd, John Lewis voting rights bill, or some kind of legislation about police brutality against Black people that happens on a regular basis. For me, I don't define my politics strictly on the basis of identity, but I also recognize that there are vulnerable groups in society that need to be looked out for, and that there's no shame in looking out for somebody who is suffering from a specific vantage point. They are part of the democracy. They are part of our society. They are our brothers and sisters. I don't think the answer is to pretend that racism has been extinguished. You may not necessarily make that the focus of your campaign, but as I think about the Harris campaign, I don't think that's what happened. I don't think her failure was she was talking about defund the police too much, or, being Black too much, or Latino too much, or whatever too much. I don't think that was the failure. I think the failure, if there was one, was to connect with the underlying sense of alienation among American voters, be they middle class, working class, whites, whatever, lower class, middle class, or low income Blacks, males, whomever. And I think the way you make that connection is through boldness. That's the Ovid quote. I don't think you can inspire people to show up without a powerful message. And I think, for me, I am patently unelectable, as my students will tell you. Sitting in 2 of my classes, you will know I can never do anything in public office. I am where I'm supposed to be. But maybe this is crazy. Let's just say if Kamala Harris, when she was on The View and someone asked her, what do you plan to do different from President Obama? Freudian slip, Biden. What do you plan on doing differently from Biden? What if she would have said, let me be ridiculous for a minute and say, well, I really respect the president. It's been a privilege to work for him. I admire him greatly. He's a tremendous human being. And he and I differ on a few things. And one of the areas we differ on is on how we can create a peace dividend for the American people. And my administration, I'm going to draw up plans to reduce defense budget by 15% and return that money to the American people in ways that better their schools, better their health care, better their life chances, better their children's health, et cetera, et cetera. 15%. Now that would never happen, right? Because we love war. We're never going to, you can never have too much of, violence. However, it didn't have to be that. That's my thing. What it did have to be was bold and energizing. That's my choice about the 15%. Whatever it is, it had to be inspiring. It had to be bold. The thing about these fascistic leaders is they speak in romantic, visionary terms. And you can't match that, in my estimation. Everyone's has their autopsy, and you throw mine on the book with every other podcast that we share with one another of why things didn't work. For me, the lack of boldness and the lack of a real agenda that cuts across race and class, income levels, that says we're doing something for you across the board, that represents real change. So why did I go through that litany? And I know this is a long answer now. Why go through that litany of the last 25 years of government failure? Because people feel alienated. And there were people who felt alienated who were thinking, I could vote for Trump, I could vote for Bernie. 1968, we shared some of this, some friends shared this recently. 1968, if you read The Last Campaign by Thurston Clark, a wonderful book about the Bobby Kennedy campaign, there were people who were Kennedy supporters, who were ready to vote for Bobby Kennedy, who then voted for Wallace. Now you say that's insane. I agree. But it's not insane if you look at it through the lens of people who are just unheard and fed up and want something different. So for me, you have to present something that is a departure. That's a departure. And I think, hewing closely to identity isn't the answer, nor is ignoring real identity issues, but something collectively we can all get on board with. And I think if you put a label on it, maybe it's a problem, you can call it progressive, whatever. It needs to be a radical departure from the politics that has absolutely failed the American people over the last 25 years. And I'm not even going back to the Kennedy assassination or I'm not going to Nixon. I'm just the last 25 years, not talking Watergate. These have been a real brutal, my brother John Baxter once asked me a question. He said, Dean, when was the last time you were happy? We should be married, me and him, because I know what he meant by it. All due respect to Katya. Me and him should be married because I know what he was talking about. That's cryptic. That's when you have a friend, right? And I knew what he meant. He meant politically, when was the last time you were able to raise your head above all this bullshit and feel a breath of fresh air? And he said to me, I don't know if you remember this, brother, he said to me, I think it was when they called Florida for Gore. And then we started to talk about 2000 and all of the celebrations when we all didn't die because of Y2K, and you saw Australia, on TV, because they had it first, right? And all the fireworks going. And there was this moment of possibility. But they never, and this is the subject of my next book. I'm going to work on it after the Lincoln book with a friend of mine named Benjamin Peters, who is a peace studies scholar. It's going to be about the peace dividend. No one came to the American people and said, Lord have mercy, this Cold War was expensive. Lordy me, these are trillions of dollars. We lost a lot of lives, killed a lot of people. I feel like we should do something for the people. We should do something for the American. They never came to us with that and said, well, here's the dividend. And people have been increasingly alienated ever since, because we got money for everything else, it seems. Trump is a Marvel comic villain. There's no question about it. But a lot of people went to see the movie Joker. People love Joker. People love the villains. They asked Al Pacino what did he attribute to his fame. This is years ago, not the recent Al Pacino going around talking about his memoir, but years ago they asked him, well, how did you become so famous? Why do people love you so much? He said, this is interesting for our times. He said, people love gangsters. They get the pretty girl, they dress however they want, they can do whatever they want, they could go, bafangu to the rest of the world, they can do whatever they want, and nothing happens to them. People love gangsters. Let him be Caesar. See, I like Shakespeare, and I like that play a lot, because he doesn't let, the people off the hook. When you talk about Cassius and all these evil bastards, and they stab in, and they got bad motives, and Brutus has his own arrogance, Shakespeare does not let the people off the hook in that play. Remember, they kill Cinna the poet. They confuse Cinna the poet with Cinna the conspirator. They're running around killing whoever. This is the people doing it, because sometimes the audience changes. That's the real troubling thing about all of this, because I don't know who half these people are anymore. I could understand a George H.W. Bush voter. I knew who they were. Right? Some of them were my colleagues. I got no problem. The audience has changed. I'm sitting next to somebody very different now. That's really disturbing. Long answer. We got time for one more question and apple pie. No, I'm teasing. Go ahead.
Thank you, in general, but these last remarks were marvelous. I don't know how to ask this in a way that's wide enough, deep enough, in this context. Maybe you could answer it that way. Trump lost in 2020 with 74.2 million votes. He won so far in 2024 with 75.6 million. Winning is winning. He won. Today, he nominated for U.S. Attorney General AG Matt Gaetz. I don't know how to make that wide enough, deep enough, but maybe you can respond to that in the context of your bigger messages.
You know, I think we have to come to grips with the reality. And there were two scholars, maybe you probably taught Martin Gillen's daughter. Was it Naomi Gillens? Naomi Gillens, thank you. Taught her at Princeton High School. Her dad was Martin Gillens, or is Martin. I don't know if he's around. I think he was out in Vanderbilt or wherever he was. Martin Gillens wrote an article with Benjamin Page. This was maybe 15 years ago now, about how America is an oligarchy, no longer a democracy. That was like 15 years ago. Now, I know you're going to cut on MSNBC tomorrow, you're going to cut on whatever station, you're going to cut on CNN, whatever you're going to cut on, you're going to go online, and everyone's going to say, our democracy is in jeopardy. Maybe it's been gone. Maybe we have to come to terms with that. This is about a restoration, not a protective kind of endeavor we're in. I think we have to really come to grips with the fact that in Trump versus Bush, which is what we studied, the Supreme Court has given, that's sort of the cherry on top. They've given him immunity for any official act any president takes. I mean, this is an absurdity. But it's not an absurdity anymore. I keep going back to, and I wish I could take credit for the best speech on democracy I've ever heard. And it was delivered at the Bread Loaf Writers Conference by a man by the name of Charles Baxter. And the title was Things About to Disappear, the writer as curator. And it was right after Trump was elected, and Baxter was paying attention to things about to disappear as a metaphor for how writers should write, but also how citizens should view their democracy. Because he talked about being a kid and watching his aunt put on a dress and a hat with a veil. And you don't see hats with a veil anymore. And he talked about old farmhouses that had combs hanging on the kitchen wall with a rope. So imagine being so poor that you didn't want to lose your comb, so you tied a rope around it, right? He talked about a bunch of things. He talked about music. A Juilliard professor was teaching his students one song, particular song from Prague in the 1890s or something, and they were playing the notes correctly, but they were not playing it with the same feeling. And instead of continuing to badger his students, the teacher pulled back and said, no, it is gone. They will never be able to play it the way it sounded. Now, I talked to my students today, and 2016, 2012, 2000 sounds like 150 years ago. Because we have things that are about to disappear and some things that have disappeared. We've reelected a person who threatened and had no qualms about his people, threatening to kill the Speaker of the House and the Vice President. And all hell broke loose, and no price has been paid. People love gangsters, Pacino said. So I'm saying, I think it needs to be, maybe it should be said out loud. I'm going to say it out loud for y'all. Y'all don't have to say this. Democracy, we don't live in a democracy any longer. We probably haven't lived in it for a while. Citizens United, what's so democratic about that kind of country? Call it a kleptocracy, call it an oligarchy. There's some brilliant names out there. That's not, I'm open to any term you want, but in terms of actually where the people count, government of the people, by the people, for the people, where that count, the brother who put the comma after with malice toward none and said, no, we need more than toleration. We need love. We need charity, caritas. We are a long way from that. And you're not going to get back to a state of democracy without some real, yes, you need reason and logic, and we need science and facts and all those things. I got news for you. the people who are out there killing Sinner the poet don't care. You're going to have to reach them in their gut and appeal to something in them that they may not even know they have. You're going to have to show something more powerful than the forces at work against you. Having said that, that's why I wanted to end with that litany of impossibilities. Because I'm not here to tell you it can't or won't change. Because I had that told to me. I went into Georgetown, Cold War is never going to end. We were reading books like Why Lenin, Why Stalin? That was the name of a book we had to read. We were reading Totalitarianism and, The Human Condition by Hannah Arendt. We were reading all these things to prepare us for a world of a forever battle with the Soviet state. And you should have seen them Georgetown professors in the School of Foreign Service trying to look over their CVs of what they were going to do next. Because all of a sudden, Reagan and Gorbachev had changed the world. All of a sudden, I walked over to my then girlfriend's apartment at Columbia Law School. You visit your girlfriend. Y'all pretty frisky Princetonians. You go over there and you visit. And on the floor of her apartment was the New York Times. This is when these were physical papers. Ask your grandparents about that, right? There were papers on the floor. Someone had delivered a paper, and on it, it said, Soviet Union dissolves, and the Soviet. The thing they told us would last forever was no more. There's no Soviet Union. So Mandela and apartheid, and you name it. So you could say Gaza, Israel, you could say Trump, you could say any kind of conflict you want. I'm here to say to you that what's in you is greater than the conflict that's on the outside of you. That the force of justice and love and peace and harmony and community that is in you is ultimately more triumphant and greater than that is opposing you right now at this moment. So let them have their day. They are having their day. But evil has always had its day. I will go down like Brutus, right? I would rather go down like Brutus and be able to live clean in my heart and say, I have won. I have glory in this losing day, more than Antony and Octavius through their vile conquest have attained unto. I will have more. I would rather lose with love. Now, I want to talk about my dad. I love my dad, God rest his soul, but he grew up in a very hard climate in New York City back in the day, right? They didn't have the Witherspoon Grill where he was hanging out. They didn't have the Princeton Library where he was hanging out in the 50s and 60s, okay? The Astoria projects. But I remember my dad had a very, very realpolitik view of the world. He said, people mistake kindness for weakness. Y'all ever hear that? Now, the price of living that life is becoming unkind so that you're not weak. If you really internalize that's Trump. I can't show any weakness. I'll never apologize. I'm never wrong. F all of y'all, right? There's a price to adopting that as a lifelong philosophy. I would rather lose, I would rather be kind than victorious and build upon my victory over the ashes of somebody who I was mean-spirited towards. No. That inner defiance is so important, but it's more than just a defiance. It's an affirmation of love. It's an affirmation of something greater. It's an affirmation of a belief in the person sitting next to you. And so if apartheid could fall, if the troubles in Northern Ireland could come to an end, if we could elect those Ohio white people who said they would never vote, they voted for Obama twice, did they not? Lord, Indiana white people voted for Barack Obama. Now, tell me if I'm wrong. Didn't them Indiana, there's not Princeton white people. These Indiana. And they told me Ohio. So you understand what I'm saying to you? They're saying, so as bleak as it looks, just hang in there. Just hang in there. Y'all pretty healthy people. Y'all doing all right. Hang in there. It'll change, and when it changes, you remember what they told you would never happen. I'm not coming at you Pollyannish and saying democracy's as strong as it ever was. No, it's gone. But we are here to build a beautiful and create a beautiful restoration. And we will narrate the stories of things that have disappeared so that they may reappear, if not for ourselves, then for our children and our loved ones and the people we care about for the next generation. I mean to pick on Indiana white people, I'm just saying. And some of y'all are like, I know some good people. I'm not, or not all of them, just, most. Well, they had some issues with Obama, all right? Anyway, but he won, didn't he? So enough, I feel it too. I feel the pain, I feel the hurt. You go to bed at night and you get a bleep thing on your phone, bing, and you're like, oh, what happened now? What did Trump do now? Who nominated now? What porn star got nominated to become, whatever? You don't know what's going on in America anymore. Right? But we've been through this. And that's why the Black freedom struggle is particularly important in this moment. And I know here in Princeton, we all know it and understand it and have read it. Like the struggles of European Jewry, like the struggles of people in Latin America who are fighting against oppression, like the indigenous people fighting for their lives, somehow trying to survive, like people in South Africa fighting for their tooth and nail for their lives. You with me? These struggles are there for a reason. Solidarnos and Lech Walesa, right? These struggles are for people who faced hopeless times. And yet somehow the world they shaped became very different. Not perfect, not subject, no longer subject to violence. I'll close with a scripture because I'm long here. There is a scripture that says, no weapon formed against you shall prosper. And a lot of times people will focus on, hey, that's great, no weapon formed against me shall prosper. Hey, there will be weapons formed against you. That's the point. To not walk around through life thinking that you are not going to be facing violent attack by political forces, malfeasant political leadership. It's part of our world. It's our job that those weapons do not prosper. And how do they not prosper? We overcome it with what? All we got is love. All we have is love and a higher calling one to another. That's what the Greeks wanted. That's what any democratic society wants. That's the hope and aspiration of anybody who believes self-government matters. It's the person sitting next to me. It's that Walt Whitman stuff. It's the person who is a divine anonymous, if you will. Sitting next to me, I have faith that they may not be getting it today, but they will get it. We will get it. We will move on. The walls will come down. We'll see Mandela walk through the prison. We will see the troubles come to an end. We will embrace one another in a spirit of love, and we will be there for each other when it happens. All right. Bless y'all. Be good.
Have a good night, everyone. Thank you so much for being here.
I'll see you tomorrow, guys. Do your homework. I know.